Very excited to hear in the keynote Fred De Lombardi, VP from Microsoft, talk about their perspective on FinOps. And in this session, we will go a bit deeper with this exquisite audience in the back here. So can I get a big applause for Trey, Gabriel, Tanuja, and Michael Flanakin from Microsoft? Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our session today. Thank you for coming out. This is great. My name is Trey Morgan. I work in the Microsoft Digital Experience organization at Microsoft. And in my role, I'm a product manager for homegrown tools that we use internally to manage our cloud costs, budget, and optimization. I work with my team to manage spend within the org and save money and be efficient as possible. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some cloud cost capabilities that we use and how we do it within my org. Our talk today is about strategies for managing cloud cost data at scale. But before we get into those details, I'd like to explain some of the benefits of bringing some of your cloud cost data in-house and how we do it within my org. Whenever you bring your cloud cost data into your company, one of the first things you need to do is join that cloud cost data with your organizational hierarchies. Within my organization and across Microsoft, we have a number of different hierarchies. We have a finance hierarchy, we have a people hierarchy, we have a service hierarchy, and we have, of course, the Azure hierarchy. So we join that cloud cost data with the various hierarchies and display that information in our cloud cost management tools internally so that all the various personas that view those costs can see cost data in the way that they need to see it and understand it. Once we have our cost tooling set up, the next thing you need to do is bring in a good budgeting and forecasting solution. At Microsoft, we have homegrown tools for budgeting and forecasting that we've built out. Those tools align all of our cost data and budgets based on our service hierarchy. And the way I like to explain our budgeting tool is that if you have about 200 engineering managers across your organization, you need to have about 200 budgets. So we have fairly granular budgeting capabilities. And it helps each team to understand their upper limits of spend and whether or not they're overspending or underspending. We have notification capabilities where we send out notifications to teams when they're underspending or overspending. They have to acknowledge those notifications and ask for an extension if they need more time to address the problem. They also can ask for an exception if they disagree with the notifications that we're sending out to them. But through automation, we're able to make sure that our organization stays within budget, or if we're trending over budget, that there's a process to ask for an approval for additional funds. And once teams have budgets in place, they're likely to be stressed and find it difficult to stay within that budget. And so one of the things that we do is generate right-sizing recommendations, and we make those available for each one of our teams so that they see opportunities to where they can save money and stay within their forecast. We display all of these recommendations within dashboards that we built out. We distribute these recommendations through a tool that we call Service 360 so that they receive the recommendations for savings opportunities. And most of what we're doing is fully automated because these teams outnumber us. Our FinOps team is small within our org, and we've got hundreds of engineering teams that can get out of hand and overspend or even underspend at any given point throughout the month. Now that we've talked about some of the benefits of bringing this cloud cost data in-house, I'd like to turn the time over to Gabriel, who's going to talk to us more about some of the strategies.
Thank you, Trey. So I'm one of the engineering managers at Microsoft in the Azure cost management space. So all of our companies have been moving to the cloud for various reasons. Perhaps the main one is the tremendous amount of scale that moving to the cloud affords. Now, with this tremendous scale, we also have tremendous amounts of cost data, and that is perhaps a reason why we're here. Now, over the next few slides, I'll explain a little bit the reasons behind this and some of the concepts and how we deal with this internally within Microsoft and how we recommend customers to do the same. For instance, within Azure, and really all the cloud service providers, there are reports that provide one record per resource per day per thing that we charge for instance, storage, compute, networking. So for instance, looking at the smallest possible resource that you could have in Azure, say a virtual machine, it's about 30 kilobytes of data for 1 month of data. That's represented by that tiny blue dot there in the screen. Now, there's different ways of analyzing this data. For instance, a tool like Excel can easily handle 2 gigabytes worth of data represented by that green dot. There's a bunch of very complicated resources, let's say Azure Kubernetes services. These provide a ton of records every month, let's say 300 kilobytes per month for a reasonably sized resource. There are some resources that provide way more information than this in a given month. Now, all of these resources together perhaps build a workload, and your businesses run on these workloads. So at this point, it's 30 megabytes, still something that Excel can easily handle. But a given organization has several workloads. So at this point, 3 gigabytes is more than Excel can handle. You could also say, hey, I'm from a really large company, we have a lot of divisions, and for us, it's even more data than that. Let's say 30 gigabytes. At this point, is way more than what Excel could possibly handle. But hey, your finance person wants to see this record over time. They want to see 2 years of how you've been using these resources. At that point, we couldn't fit it into the slide. So what do we do in that case? Do you break this report into 300 and something files and analyze one by one? We had a program manager in the team that was trying to do some of this during the pandemic when she was working from home. Her kids hated her because Netflix would not work every time she tried to download one of these files. Once she managed to get the files, well, Excel also hated her. No? So what do? Well, there's definitely other tools. There's Power BI, there's Tableau that load this data that can afford bigger scale. However, at some point, you will have more data than these tools can afford. So over the next slides, we have some advice, some guidance on how we typically handle this. These reports that I was referring to, one record per resource per meter per day, is what we usually call raw data. This data here, say represented for one resource by that image, is useful to answer really all types of business questions for a given resource. Is there an anomaly? Was it turned off for some days? What's happening with that very specific resource? Now, this is tremendous amount of data for all of the resources that an organization has, so you will run into some limits at some point. So summarized data is usually what we refer to, which is more compact data that is useful to answer some key specific questions about the business. You won't be able to answer all questions, but if you know what questions you want to answer, you can summarize the data in a way that you can answer those questions easily. For instance, aggregated data means that many rows get merged into one. For instance, the image there on the right of the screen, that one refers to the cost of one resource for a given month. So as you can see, it's super compact. It's 3 cells, one row, but you can only answer that question. Filtered refers to, say, only looking at the resources that you want. Not all of the resources might be relevant to a given analysis. Reduced means dropping several columns. The typical cost reports have somewhere between 70 and 100 columns. You may not need all those columns for a given analysis. So summarized data sets are useful to answer a few specific questions. These need to be generated, so they add some latency to the analysis that you may want to do. But they're very easy to load into Excel, Power BI, do presentations on it, et cetera. Very easy to analyze. So there's always this balance between raw data, where you have all of it, and summarized data, which is only for some specific questions. The following are some principles that we tend to follow when we try to build pipelines to analyze all of this data. Plan for growth. You may be at the stage where 30 megabytes of data per month is more or less what you get, but at some point, you're going to accumulate more of this data. At some point, 30 megabytes multiplied by 24 months is going to be kind of what you're going to be looking at. At some point, you'll have more resources. So plan for growth, monitor the growth that you have so that you can stay ahead of the tools that you're using. Data cleanup, normalization. We all heard about focus earlier today. Normalization refers to organizing the data in a way that can be easily consumed by an organization. So focus is meant to help with this. There are some further presentations on this later today. Definitely recommend that you take a look at some of this. Centralized data management. If all of this data is in one place, you're only paying for storage for this data once as opposed to paying multiple times for it. Also, governance on who has access to the data can be easily managed as opposed to having to contact a bunch of people every time you want to make sure that the data is only accessed by the right people. COGS considerations, perhaps this is the most basic of rows that you'll hear in this conference. You need to be conscious of the COGS, the cost that you're incurring by analyzing the data. Some solutions, like say Azure cost analysis, are free. Some things that you need to, if you're going to summarize the data, there's charges for that you need to be conscious of. Lifecycle and retention. What we usually recommend is that organizations keep all of the raw data forever. These are just text files that you can store in cloud providers. It's not very expensive to store this data. We recommend that people keep it. And for summarized data, keep what your organization needs. Understand the use cases. Be intentional. Like, what are the questions that we're going to get on this data? For those, try to build summarized data sets so that reporting is easier. Understanding well how the data will be used makes it a lot simpler. The data can be so massive that when we're trying to build a new metric, we usually recommend to build a metric on one day. Once the metric looks good, okay, then run it for the whole month, run it for the whole year, or summarize that data so that it's easier as time goes on. And understand the infrastructure limits. All the infrastructure has limits. Each type of infrastructure will have some limits. So understand the profile of those that you're using. Understand when you'll need to jump to another one, when you'll need to summarize data, when you'll need to have a different strategy. Now, these principles are all relevant in, because big data workflow. Big data is the common term for the strategies that we follow to analyze these massive amounts of data that wouldn't fit into something like Excel. This process is commonly referred to as ETL, extract, transform, and load. And in this next slide, it's a little bit more detailed. I'll walk through each one of these different cells. Here, for instance, data sources refers to where you'll get the raw data from. This can be the different cloud providers that you're working with. This can also be internal information. For instance, it can be COGS for on-prem services that you're running or other internal costs. This data is usually stored in cold storage. This is really file storage. In Azure, we call it blob storage. This is fairly cheap. This is where we recommend that you keep really all of this cost data really for the foreseeable future. Like we recommend that people keep this data around. Sometimes analysis needs to happen on something that happened 5 years ago, things like that. Again, this is fairly cheap. Now, machine learning has been quite a bit in the news lately. This usually uses raw data and consumes this data to be able to provide forecasting, anomaly detection, categorize data, et cetera. As we go forward, there will be more and more and more of this type of services and solutions. There's certainly some of them out there. These usually consume data from cold storage, from raw data. Batch processing is usually long-running jobs that transform the data from one format into another. This is usually where summarization would happen. Given very specific reports that you need generated, batch jobs would transform raw data into those specific things that you would need. These data can often be just dropped back into cold storage, or it can be put into analytical data storage. Analytical data storage costs a lot more than file storage. These are solutions like SQL, like Cosmos DB, et cetera. Data can be easily accessed. Data can be further analyzed, aggregated, filtered, sorted, et cetera, on the fly. You cannot analyze on the fly terabytes and terabytes of data, so you need to be specific on exactly what data you want to put in analytical data storage. Again, this one costs significantly more than just file storage, but provides a lot more intelligence to the data that you have. And all of this data is easily loaded into reporting solutions. This can be something as simple as Power BI and PowerPoint, or it can be more complicated like Tableau, Jupyter, et cetera, where you can further look at the data, you can run some analysis, et cetera. All of this is coordinated by an orchestration layer. There's different solutions for this. Now, this is somewhat of a simplified, super high-level view of a data pipeline. Organizations can have way, way more complicated pipelines than this. Something like this is what feeds data into Azure Cost Management, for instance. And for very large, medium to large organizations, we think that customers will also need to have something similar on their side for very, very specific needs that they might have. Each large organization tends to have metrics that are very specific to them. So this allows customers to do that. Now, in the next section, my colleague Tanuja will walk us further through what organizations typically need.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Hey, everyone. I am Tanuja Shah, and I'm a technical program manager. I'm going to walk you through this reporting phase because this becomes what you heard, the common theme this morning, which is visualization, visibility into what is being used, what is being consumed by your cloud platform resources. So before I get into our customer experiences, what we're learning from our customers, I want to kind of point out what are the common ideas and visibility points that you should have in a reporting tool, no matter what it is, be it Power BI or a few that Gabriel just mentioned. First, 8 things that we commonly see in these reports from our customers, and we work with a lot of customers, big, small, medium size. Service resource identification. I cannot stress enough, tagging, tagging, tagging. This is really going to give you that raw, clean data to assess, analyze, and then learn from and see how you can improve the posture of your cost spending, because that's a common concern. Time and period, when was it used? How long do you want to capture that time period metrics? Daily, weekly, monthly, depends on your rhythm of business. Usage metrics, how much was it used? If you have a resource, a virtual machine, or app service, or what have you, how long was it used? And then that gives you that volume data and then the usage metrics based on those meters. Cost breakdown, a lot of organizations today are struggling, from what we observe, is to understand who's using what, how is it done for the shared cost, especially for shared services like DNS, your networking, your hub and spoke connectivity, and IO, right? So those type of cost breakdown. Are you doing them by department, by cost center? How is that done? Cost allocation, it really ties back into the breakdown. You know, who is consuming what quantity of your usage in your cloud? Currency and units, globally, it's not the same currency, obviously. So you want to capture what is the currency, local currency to that particular zone or global zone. Comparison and trends, key thing here, because this gives you an insight into what you consumed compared to what you're forecasting. Those trends is actually going to really give you that early indication of budgeting for the next coming term. And visualization, your C-suite folks are always gonna want to see this data in a form they love to see, pie charts, bar charts, what have you. So that visualization is really important. I want to share a little bit of a best practices learned from our customers. I'm going to not name them, but they're all in big insurance companies, retail, we have manufacturers. What do we see with them? The biggest observation is this slide here. They lift and ship and onboard massive workloads, right? Because whatever the reason they want to get out of the on-prem data center and go into cloud, that massive migration is done without real optimization in mind. And next phase is, oh my God, my bill is so high. You heard from RJ earlier this morning, right? He was saying $250,000 extra or something like that. I'm like, yeah, that's what our customers are seeing. Okay, we migrated a big workload. Costs are spiking up. What do? Let's find tools that will take care of showing us where the usage is. And then what happens next? We're trying to rush to do the reduction optimization. How do we bring this cost down and make it manageable? Our biggest advice to all these customers that we work with is create those business value driven reports, because these reports really give you that insight into who's using what and how do you hold people accountable? How do you give this responsibility to the person who's driving this particular workload? So here are common observations that I've learned from the customers that I work with. One of the best practices is having those business value driven reports focus on a service that is your highest key driver, okay, cost driver. So in this example, as you can see, data is gold today, right? We all need so much data, and you heard from Gabriel that how massive this data can get. So with that, this slide, we talked to the customer and we captured reports that are based on their storage usage, capacity, access tier, redundancy, and of course the regions. And as you can see, reduce capacity. If you're not using it, then reduce it. Pay for what you use is the biggest key learning here. Data compression, deduplication, resizing the VM drives. If you've over-provisioned things, it's really, this report is going to drive that decision-making triggers for your C-suites and say, look, here's where we can cut down. I'm going to go a little bit faster. We're running out of time. Implementing the strategy. When you learn that your storage layer is a big driver, what do you do about it? Business values come out of these reporting and decision making. So here, this customer actually went and adopted a policy implementation, 80% reserve capacity. Anything that is long-term and is going to be permanent in a nature, reserve capacity is a no-brainer. So you would just literally take that bottom chunk in this slide, reserve that reduces up to 70% of your cost. For the things that are going to be permanent or a long-term nature, 1 year, 3-year capacity reservation is obviously a plus for you or win. This customer deployed this 80% reserve capacity policy, and they ended up saving 59% over pay-as-you-go. The next one was a report that was really, really focused on the access tier, because this is the hotter the tier, the more spend, more cost it's going to be. If you have data that is not constantly accessed, move them between these tiers. As you can see, Pool and Archive is comparatively very cheaper to the hot one. So do that analysis. This report will give you that deeper insight into your usage. And then 95% of tier management, moving data across high to low to inexpensive tiers, is how this customer really did a 78% alignment to their access to your data. With that, I've said a lot. I'm going to go ahead and do one last announcement. We're going to have 3 customer sessions. These are focused on you. We want to learn from you. We want to listen to you. What is working for you, what's not? What would you like to see for FinOps tools and products as we develop them? So if you have the ability, please come attend any one of these. See us at the booth P3, and we'll set you up. I want to leave some time for Q&A. So with that Q&A, please ask any questions that you have for all of us.
All right, we have time for 5 minutes of Q&A. Who has a question for the Microsoft folks? No one.
Oh, we must be doing great.
I think so, yeah.
Got one over here.
I'll walk over there.
Hey, thanks for the great presentation. How do you use the, like, I was wishing to know more about cost management app that you guys provide as part of Azure Cloud management. And also the question is, if you go for like cold tier in your solutioning, if you want to do a unit costing day to day, how does it work?
So you're asking how would you do unit cost calculations?
From day to day, if you want to monitor every day, and if you're proposing cold tier, how does that work?
Do you want to?
Go? No, you go ahead. That's a tough one.
Yeah, unit cost is, it's funny, JR mentioned it earlier, it's like I think, did he say Holy Grail? At least that's how I think about it. It really comes down to pulling the data that you need, because you're not going to get all that out of the cost data. Especially as different organizations are accessing the data and seeing how much the data is used, which Tanuja was talking a little bit about monitoring some of that. I don't have a perfect answer for you, because it's really about, unit economics is really just about understanding how the different components of your solutions are being used. I know when I've talked to some customers about that, one thing that comes up a lot is telemetry. Because there's some data that you can get out of the cloud. For storage, for instance, you should be able to get all the data that you need out of the cloud. So that one's good. But as you're looking at unit economics at scale for other things, you might start wanting to look into how can you add telemetry to your applications to measure how you're using it for the specific units that are important to you, which might be customers, it might be applications, it might be a car, devices, whatever that might be. But whatever it is that you're trying to calculate the unit economics for, the unit cost for, it's really just about getting access to the right data that's going to be able to map back to that unit and what that unit is for you. So not a very precise answer for that, but I think that's just because when it comes to unit costs,
It's very specific to a customer product, depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
But it comes down to shared cost. Yep. You have shared cost. That's the key part. And then most of all our services do have metered category that you could capture, right,
yeah.
Michael?
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you want to stop by the booth, we can
please.
talk in more detail.
Time for one more? All right. I'll walk over here, get my steps.
Hi, in the spirit and theme of what the Focus Initiative brings, which is like, I think, lowering the barrier of entry for technology teams to actually practice FinOps, what insights have you gained through your homegrown tools, and because you mentioned homegrown, are any of those insights and learnings being carried forward to extend functionality to the customer for example, storage lifecycle policy, you have APIs that the onus is on the customer to integrate and engineer around, which is great, but that would be an example perhaps where you bring more of an intelligent tiering feature forward. So you don't have to speak about storage, but is there any insights you're gaining to bring forward functionality for customers?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, the interesting thing is when Trey first joined Microsoft, so Trey's a practitioner in the company, and I was starting conversations with his team when he first joined to try to figure out how can we take the learnings that they have and build that natively into the tools. Because he talked about earlier some budgeting and forecasting tools that we have internally, which works a lot different than the budgeting, which is mostly around alerts and cost management. And we've definitely been having conversations trying to figure out how can we bring those tools out to the masses. It's a long road.
Yeah, there's definitely a desire. We're just not quite there yet. Yeah.
All right, cool. Can I get a huge applause for the Microsoft folks then? Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for watching that session. I'm sitting here in San Diego right after FinOps X. We hope you join us next year here live 2024. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel and join the community. Get involved, join the summits, get in a working group, and don't forget to get FinOps certified. Because next year here in San Diego for FinOps X, it's going to be twice as big. Come join the party. Come meet your people. Welcome home.